here on what is, was, and always will be Aboriginal land. Today I reaffirm my government's solemn promise to implement the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full.
Suddenly, with one speech in a remote part of Australia, the Prime Minister moved his government from one mainly just being buffeted by profound world events to one that wanted to make a mark of its own, to attend to some long-delayed but historically significant national business.
We are all here, eager to work with you to bring our commitment to Uluru to life. The Uluru Statement is a hand outstretched, a moving show of faith in Australian decency and Australian fairness from people who have been given every reason to forsake their hope in both. I am determined, as a government, as a country, that we grasp that hand of healing. We repay that faith. We rise to the moment.
To the surprise of many, Anthony Albanese has rapidly launched the push to enshrine an Indigenous voice to Parliament in our Constitution, locking his new government into one of the most historically difficult things for any government to do. Not, as the previous government had proposed but never got round to, via a path of first legislating such a body, but diving straight to the heart of the matter, addressing the Constitution's jarring silence on recognition of the original occupants of this continent for millennia by giving them a voice.
We should consider asking our fellow Australians something as simple but something as clear as this. Do you support an alteration to the Constitution that establishes an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice? A straightforward proposition, a simple principle.
The idea of the voice emerged from a meeting of First Australians at Uluru in 2017.
We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution.
But it followed a decade of debate about how Indigenous Australians should be recognised in the Constitution. It had been Conservative Prime Minister John Howard who had put the question of Indigenous recognition in the Constitution on the agenda, even if the early talk was only focused on mentioning them in a preamble.
I sense that the Australian people want to move, and they want to move towards a new settlement of this issue.
It was quite a change from the beginning of his term as Prime Minister in 1996, a time when Pauline Hanson had first entered Parliament complaining about Aboriginal privilege. Back then, Howard had mounted an assault on a representative Indigenous body established by the Hawke government, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, or ATSIC.
A tough new financial accountability regime for ATSIC.
His government would eventually oversee the dismantling of ATSIC and, amid allegations of widespread corruption, a purge of many of the other bodies, such as land councils and legal services, which also represented and advocated for Indigenous people.
We must not join those who would portray Australia's history since 1788 as little more than a disgraceful record of imperialism. So ladies and gentlemen...
Howard's move did more than just close down an organisation. ATSIC offered First Australians a voice that could speak authoritatively in the national conversation on their behalf. And, sometimes overlooked, it offered a body which could become a platform on which new Indigenous leaders could emerge, as they did from the brief period when ATSIC lived.
It was a great place for Indigenous people to learn amongst their own people the broader politics of things, black politics, about bureaucracy.
With ATSIC silenced, it became harder for First Australians to be heard on issues from deaths in custody to the draconian clamps put on welfare payments and alcohol consumption as part of the so-called intervention in the Northern Territory.
We saw the Northern Territory intervention in 2007. We saw hundreds of millions of dollars cut from community services. All of these things happened without a voice strong enough to stand up and say, hang on, what you're going to do, Parliament, is wrong and it's going to damage us.
When the idea of a voiced parliament was first proposed by the 2017 Uluru Statement, it was summarily dismissed by the Turnbull government after Nationals leader Barnaby Joyce suggested it would be a third chamber of the parliament. Yet it didn't go away altogether. Most recently, the Morrison government charged two academics, Marcia Langton and Tom Karma, with developing models for representative bodies. The advisory group looked at examples of First Nations voices in comparable jurisdictions like the US, Canada and New Zealand. New Zealand had a heated debate over compensation for past breaches of the country's founding document, the Treaty of Waitangi, about honouring the treaty, at the same time Australia was dealing with the fallout from the Mabo judgment in the 1990s.
Non-Māori disquiet and Māori expectation.
The debate was led by Conservative Prime Minister Jim Bolger.
We're asking it because we believe it is time.
And what we're really talking about is New Zealand's honour. But there's no question what the intent was, that there should be a respect and understanding and acknowledgement that Māori were here first, that they own the assets of the land.
Here in Australia, Scott Morrison's government rejected the big picture and constitutional change and instead talked about the details of a legislated body. Langton and Karma reported in July last year on a system of local and regional voices based in existing Indigenous bodies and a national voice to advise the Parliament on laws, policies and programs. The Morrison government had not responded to the report at the time it lost office. Now the Albanese government has gone back to the big picture, though using the structures proposed by Langton and Karma.
The greatest thing that came out of Karma and Prime Minister Albanese's speech was to give us some shape and direction for the national debate. But people shouldn't forget that this is simply about recognition of Indigenous people, something that should have been done at least in 1901 when this country federated.
The challenge for now will be keeping the debate focused on the proposed constitutional change, reassuring Conservatives that Parliament will ultimately determine the shape of the consulting body. For now, the opposition spokesman Julian Leeser is giving room for a discussion to take place. The Greens have suggested treaties and truth-telling need to come first. One of the most eloquent Indigenous advocates of the last few decades, who has survived the turmoil from Mabo to Uluru, is Noel Pearson. In a speech last year, he summarised what advocates of the voice would argue is its most powerful rationale.
As long as its Indigenous peoples remain unrecognised, then Australia is an absurdity. A nation missing its most vital heart.